Hewlett-Packard CEO Carly Fiorina. And Ohio Governor John Kasich. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome these Republican candidates for President of the United States. This is the final Republican debate before Senator Rubio.
Thank you, Wolf. It's really amazing to be back in Las Vegas. I spent 6 years here as a child growing up. Not far from where we stand tonight, I used to sit in the porch of our home and listen to my grandfather tell stories as he smoked one of his 3 daily cigars. One of the things my grandfather instilled in me is that I was really blessed because I was a citizen of the greatest country in the history of all mankind. But there have always been people in American politics that wanted America to be more like the rest of the world. And in 2008, one of them was elected president of this country. And the result has been a disaster. Today, you have millions of Americans that feel left out and out of place in their own country, struggling to live paycheck to paycheck, called bigots because they hold on to traditional values. And around the world, America's influence has declined. While this president's destroyed our military, our allies no longer trust us, and our adversaries no longer respect us. And that is why this election is so important. That is why I'm running for president. And that's why I'm going to ask you for your vote tonight. If you elect me president, we will have a president that believes America's the greatest country in the world, and we will have a president that acts like it.
Senator Rubio, I'm going to go to Senator Rubio and get his thoughts. So you have said banning Muslims is unconstitutional, but according to a recent ABC News Washington Post poll, a majority of Republicans support Mr. Trump's idea. Why are they wrong?
Well, I understand why they feel that way, because this president hasn't kept us safe. The problem is we had an attack in San Bernardino, and we were paying attention to the most important issue we have faced in this country in a decade, since 9/11, and then all the talk was about this proposal, which isn't going to happen. But this is what's important to do. Is we must deal frontally with this threat of radical Islamists, especially from ISIS. This is the most sophisticated terror group that has ever threatened the world or the United States of America. They are actively recruiting Americans. The attacker in San Bernardino was an American citizen, born and raised in this country. He was a health inspector, had a newborn child, and left all that behind to kill 14 people. We also understand that this is a group that's growing in its governance of territory. It's not just Iraq and Syria. They are now a predominant group in Libya. They are beginning to pop up in Afghanistan. They are increasingly involved now in attacks in Yemen. They have Jordan in their sights. This group needs to be confronted with serious proposals. And this is a very significant threat we face, and the president has left us unsafe. He spoke the other night to the American people to reassure us. I wish he hadn't spoken at all. He made things worse, because what he basically said was we are going to keep doing what we're doing now, and what we are doing now is not working. And so are those that voted for it. There were some that voted for it because they wanted to keep it alive, and they were afraid the whole program would expire. Here's the world we live in. This is a radical jihadist group that is increasingly sophisticated in its ability, for example, to radicalize American citizens, in its ability to exploit loopholes in our legal immigration system, in its ability to capture and hold territory in the Middle East, as I outlined earlier, in multiple countries. This is not just the most capable, it is the most sophisticated terror threat we have ever faced. We are now at a time when we need more tools, not less tools. And that tool we lost, the metadata program, was a valuable tool that we no longer have at our disposal.
Senator Cruz.
Let me be very careful in answering this, because I don't think national television in front of 15 million people is the place to discuss classified information. So let me just be very clear. There is nothing that we are allowed to do under this bill that we could not do before. This bill did, however, take away a valuable tool that allowed the National Security Agency and other intelligence agencies to quickly and rapidly access phone records and match them up with other phone records to see who terrorists have been calling. Because I promise you, the next time there is an attack on this country, the first thing people are going to want to know is, why didn't we know about it and why didn't we stop it? And the answer better not be because we didn't have access to records or information that would have allowed us to identify these killers before they attacked.
Senator Rubio.
I want to thank Rand for another 30 seconds because, number one, what he's pointing to is a bill last week, an amendment he voted for that only 10 people voted for. You know why? Because it's not focused on terrorists. It would have banned anyone from coming here. Someone from Taiwan would not have been able to come here as a tourist. Number two, this program, this metadata program, is actually more strict than what a regular law enforcement agency has now. If a regular law enforcement agency wants your phone records, all they have to do is issue a subpoena. But now the intelligence agency is not able to quickly gather records and look at them to see who these terrorists are calling. And the terrorist that attacked us in San Bernardino was an American citizen, born and raised in this country. And I bet you we wish we would have had access to 5 years of his records so we could see who he was working with before they carry out another attack.
Christie, you have heard.
Senator Rubio, you've been critical of Senator Cruz's strategy. You say his voting record doesn't match his rhetoric. Why?
Well, let me begin by saying that we have to understand who ISIS is. ISIS is a radical Sunni group. They cannot just be defeated through airstrikes. Airstrikes are a key component of defeating them, but they must be defeated on the ground by a ground force. And that ground force must be primarily made up of Sunni Arabs themselves. Sunni Arabs that reject them ideologically and confront them militarily. We will have to embed additional American special operators alongside them to help them with training, to help them conduct special missions, and to help improve the airstrikes. The airstrikes are important, but we need to have an Air Force capable of it. And because of the budget cuts we are facing in this country, we are going to be left with the oldest and the smallest Air Force we have ever had. We have to reverse those cuts, in addition to the cuts to our Navy and in addition to the cuts to our Army as well. And beyond that, I would say we must win the information war against ISIS. Every war we have ever been involved in has had a propaganda informational aspect to it. ISIS is winning the propaganda war. They are recruiting people, including Americans, to join them with the promise that they are joining this great apocalyptic movement that is going to defeat the West. We have to show what life is really like in ISIS territory, and we have to show them why ISIS is not invincible by going out and conducting these attacks and publicizing them to those who they recruit.
Because I asked the question, Senator, because you said this. You said he, referring to Senator Cruz, voted against the Defense Authorization Act every year that it came up, and I assume that if he voted against it, he would veto it as president. That's the bill that funds our troops.
That is accurate. 3 times he voted against the Defense Authorization Act, which is a bill that funds the troops. It also, by the way, funds the Iron Dome and other important programs. And I have to assume that if you vote against it in the Senate, you would also veto it as president. He has also supported, by the way, a budget that is called the containment budget. And it is a budget that would radically reduce the amount of money we spend on our military. You can't carpet bomb ISIS if you don't have planes and bombs to attack them with. And if we continue those cuts that we're doing now, not to mention additional cuts, we are going to be left with the oldest and the smallest Air Force this country has ever had. And that leaves us less safe.
Senator Rubio.
Yeah, 3 points of distinction. The first is, if you're an American citizen and you decide to join up with ISIS, we're not going to read you your Miranda rights. You're going to be treated as an enemy combatant, a member of an army attacking this country. Number 2, we do need our defense capabilities. It is a fact that the cuts we are facing today and the cuts that Senator Cruz would have supported would leave us with an even smaller Air Force and a smaller Navy than the one we are going to be left with. And the final point that I would make is Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama's strategy is to lead from behind. It sounds like what he's outlining is not to lead at all. We cannot continue to outsource foreign policy. We must lead. We are the most powerful nation in the world. We need to begin to act like it again.
We're going to have much right now. Let's talk about one of the aspects of your strategy. You say the only way to defeat ISIS is with ground forces made up primarily of Sunni Arab forces.
Yes.
Those Arab nations, though, as you well know, they've conducted less than 5% of the airstrikes and actually none since August. What makes you think they are willing to fight on the ground if they're not even willing to fight from the air?
Well, they most certainly will have to be worked on to provide more than what they are doing now. There's no doubt about it. And there's one major reason why they have not been willing to be a broader part of the coalition, and that is they have lost complete trust and confidence in this president. This president cut a deal with their mortal enemy, the Shia, in Iran. And this is the reason why they no longer trust this president or are willing to work alongside them. But they have as much invested in this as we do, in fact, more so. For it is the king of Saudi Arabia they want to behead first. It's the king of Jordan that they want to dethrone. They want to go into Egypt, like the way they've already gone into Libya. And on another point we need to talk about, Assad is one of the main reasons why ISIS even exists to begin with. Assad is a puppet of Iran, and he has been so brutal towards the Sunni within Syria that he created the space that led for the people of Syria themselves to stand up and try to overthrow him. That led to the chaos, which allowed ISIS to come in and take advantage of that situation and grow more powerful. And the fact that this president led from behind meant there were no alternative groups on the ground to be empowered, leaving ISIS the prime operating space they needed to become the force they have now become.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator. Senator Rubio, You supported the removal of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. Now that country is in turmoil as ISIS is clearly growing there. Senator Cruz says you haven't learned your lesson. Do you have any regrets for supporting President Obama's intervention in Libya?
To begin with, Muammar Gaddafi and the revolt against Gaddafi was not started by the United States. It was started by the Libyan people. And the reason why I argue we needed to get involved is because he was going to go one way or the other. And my argument then was proven true, and that is the longer that civil war took, the more militias would be formed, and the more unstable the country would be after the fact. As far as Muammar Gaddafi is concerned, by the way, Muammar Gaddafi is the man that killed those Americans over Lockerbie, Scotland. Muammar Gaddafi is also the man that bombed that cafe in Berlin and killed those Marines. And you want to know why Muammar Gaddafi started cooperating on his nuclear program? Because we got rid of Saddam Hussein. And so he got scared that he would be next, and that's why he started cooperating. Look, we will have to work around the world with less than ideal governments. The government in Saudi Arabia is not a democracy, but we will have to work with them. The government in Jordan is not perfect, but we will have to work with them. But anti-American dictators like Assad, who help Hezbollah, who help get those IEDs into Iraq, if they go, I will not shed a tear.
Senator Cruz?
Yeah. You co-authored a bill with Democrats 2 years ago that allowed a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. Do you still support that path to citizenship, which means giving those immigrants rights like the right to vote?
Yeah. Immigration is not an issue that I read about in the newspaper or watch a documentary on PBS or CNN. It's an issue I've lived around my whole life. My family are immigrants. My wife's family are immigrants. All of my neighbors are immigrants. I see every aspect of this problem, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And here's what we learned in 2013. The American people don't trust the federal government to enforce our immigration laws. And we will not be able to do anything on immigration until we first prove to the American people that illegal immigration is under control. And we can do that. We know what it takes to do that. It takes at least 20,000 more additional border agents. It takes completing those 700 miles of fencing. It takes a mandatory E-Verify system and a mandatory entry-exit tracking system to prevent visa overstays. After we've done that, the second thing we have to do is reform and modernize the legal immigration system. And after we've done those two things, I think the American people are going to be very reasonable with what do you do with someone who's been in this country for 10 or 12 years, who hasn't otherwise violated our laws because if they're a criminal, they can't stay. They'll have to undergo a background check, pay a fine, start paying taxes, and ultimately they'll be given a work permit. And that's all they're going to be allowed to have for at least 10 years. But you can't. And that was the lesson we learned in 2013. There is no trust that the federal government will enforce the law. They will not support you until they see it done first.
Senator, you haven't answered the question. You just described a very long path, but does that path end at citizenship?
Oh, but I've answered that question repeatedly. I am personally open. After all of that has happened, and after 10 years in that probationary status where all they have is a work permit, I personally am open to allowing people to apply for a green card. That may not be a majority position in my party, but that's down the road. You can't even begin that process until you prove to people, not just pass a law that says you're going to bring illegal immigration under control. You're going to have to do it and prove to people that it's working. And that was the lesson of 2013, and it's more true today than it was then. After a migratory crisis on the border with minors coming over that you're seeing start up again now, after all these executive orders the president has issued, more than ever, we need to prove to people that illegal immigration is under control.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Senator Rubio, please.
Yeah, a couple points. In 2013, we had never faced a crisis like the Syrian refugee crisis now. Up until that point, a refugee meant someone fleeing oppression, fleeing communism, like it is in my community. As far as Ted's record, I'm always puzzled by his attack on this issue. Ted, you support legalizing people who are in this country illegally. Ted Cruz supported a 500% increase in the number of H-1B visas, the guest workers that are allowed into this country, and Ted supports doubling the number of green cards. So I think what's important for us to understand is there is a way forward on this issue that we can bring our country together on. And when I'm president, I will do it. And it will begin by bringing illegal immigration under control and proving it to the American people.
Dana.
As he's just admitted, the reason why those refugees were allowed in is because they messed up in how they used the actual database. They should have known. They didn't because they didn't run the actual law as it exists now. It didn't work well. As far as the refugees are concerned, it's not that America doesn't want to accept refugees, Wolf. It's that we may not be able to because this is an issue we have to be 100% right on. If we allow 9,999 Syrian refugees into the United States, and all of them are good people, but we allow one person in who's an ISIS killer, we just get one person wrong. We got a serious problem. And there is not a single person in the national defense apparatus of this country that can guarantee you we're going to be 100% right. And that's why, as president, I'll take this very seriously.
Senator Paul.
Do you have a response?
I do. Well, first, let's explain to people home what the triad is. Maybe a lot of people haven't heard that terminology before. The triad is our ability of the United States to conduct nuclear attacks using airplanes, using missiles launched from silos or from the ground, and also from our nuclear subs, ability to attack. And it's important, all three of them are critical. It gives us the ability at deterrence. Now, some have become more critical than others, for example, the submarines. And that's the Ohio-class submarine that needs to be modernized. The air component also needs to be modernized. The B-52, as someone earlier pointed out, is an outdated model that was flown by the grandparents of people that are flying it now. And we need a serious modernization program as well on our silo-launched missiles. All three are critical for the defense.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. Coming up when we come back, everyone will have an opportunity to explain why this particular candidate, each of you on the stage, believes he or she should be the Republican presidential nominee.
Very much.
Senator Rubio.
Thank you. As we near the end of this year, we enter one of the most important elections in a generation. For what's at stake in this election is not simply what party's going to be in charge, but our very identity as a people and as a nation. For over 200 years, this has been a special country, a unique place where anyone from anywhere can achieve anything. But now millions of Americans feel like they're being left behind, insecure in their future and unsafe in the face of terrorism. This election is about electing a president that will restore our economic vibrancy so that the American dream can expand to reach more people and change more lives than ever before, and rebuild our military and our intelligence programs so that we can remain the strongest nation on earth. Tonight, I ask you for your vote. If you do this, we will rebuild this country, and together we will usher in a new American century, the greatest era in the history of this great land.
Thanks to all the Republican presidential candidates. That does it for this Republican presidential debate. On behalf of everyone at CNN, we want to thank the candidates, Facebook, the Republican National Committee, and the Venetian Las Vegas. My thanks also to Hugh Hewitt and Dana Bash. We especially want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, especially to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine protecting our nation around